All right, everyone. Little Justin Trudeau has problems over in Canada. I mean, he has been for a while now, but apparently there was a special election there, and the Green Party managed to win a seat. Like, it's only like, what did it say, the third seat since their inception as a party, something that they've won in this manner, stealing it away from Trudeau's Liberal Party. I'm thinking to myself, here's another example of that sort of world paradigm shift that I've been speaking of. A lot of times we focus on just the movements to the right, but really it is also a movement to the left. It's really just a separation of people into two fundamental ideological camps. People that want to go back to the age of imperialism, that is, the leftists. They want to go back to imperialism, export it to a global scale, micromanage people's lives, censor things, disarm people. They want to lord. They think that they're benevolent, like they're trying to be benevolent in their malevolence. So what they want to do is they want to like enslave a bunch of Africans, but they'll say that they're doing it and they're trying to control their way of life for their own good. It's basically, that's the nanny state mentality of the post-imperialistic global era. And then you have the other side, the new right, and this is, far beyond like alt-right sort of thing. It comprises various kinds of nationalists, libertarians, populism, nativism, basically anything opposed to imperialism in the general sense. It's very interesting because when we think of the nationalism of yesteryear that's held up as the standard of supposedly the far right, it was actually imperialist leftism for the most part. Like when we think of Stalinism or something, there was never an effort to just wall off the commie world and say, okay, well, we're just going to keep the West out and be communists in here. There was a constant attempt of expansionism. The domino effect never happened, and our invasions in parts of Asia were never justified, but that was the general theory at the time, and it was technically true. Or you'd think of the Nazi Party. And the idea that the Nazis were truly nationalistic towards the end at all in anything but name is kind of funny when you consider the fact that they were literally trying to gobble up as much land as possible. Lebensraum. It's an imperialistic concept. An extension of their initially nationalistic doctrine, but a warped perversion of it. Sort of put him in the same camp as Stalin, I suppose, at that point. But it's very funny because the liberals of like Trudeau are half-assed leftists. They're more globalistic, I think. The Greens are more like locally far left, but they're definitely further left. They're more of an economically populist group of socialists or something, which is actually interesting. There is no comparable group, by the way, in the United States. Like, our Green movement is a joke, has never had any power whatsoever. Theirs has a seat now. Wow, that puts him head over heels above hippie grandma. She better go out and campaign more. She needs to chain herself to a few more bulldozers this time for an optics win. By the way, definitely a cool candidate for doing so, even if I think that her particular politics suck. So we got a situation now where Trudeau is even being embattled from the left. And this is really the problem with the center leftists here too. We're seeing the same issue for the Democrats here in the US. You have a party that is fundamentally center left, at least in name. Now, of course, as someone who's more libertarian, I look at it as further left than they would consider themselves, but by normie standards, by the so-called must-centrism, where radical centrist idea, the Democrats are generally a center-left neoliberal movement. Again, it's far left by my standards, but that's what they say. But then you have a growing schismatic principle within the party, which is even within party. It's not just the two parties are pulling apart. That's very much true, especially the left moving further left. But within the left, you also have a group that's stubbornly trying to remain in the center. And I think what's going to happen here, this has nothing to do with Canada, is that some millions of center leftists join with the right. And it starts a new paradigm. The left ends up snapping back in, burns, to the ground, basically, rises from the ashes in a new form, hopefully a party of JFK sort of thing, where they have some civic principle in mind and they're not just sitting there browbeating people for being white or whatever. But that may not happen. We got to wait and see. But anyway, even within the left, then you have the other side of it, which is pulling further and further to the left, even than the core that's already moving that direction. You have the Bernie Sanders, the AOCs, the Ilhan Omars, the radicals within the party that are communists, basically. You see this in Canada now, I suppose, too. And the fact that this special election that should have been easily held by a party as large as the Liberals there, they should have been able to throw more effort at it and maintain the seat. But instead they lose it to the Green Party of all groups, which I guess is flabbergasting people there in Canada. I'm not particularly surprised to hear the news, though. Stuff like this happens all over Europe. Remember the Austrian election a few years ago was fundamentally, it boiled down to the two final candidates being on the ballot. being someone leading a former Teutonic nationalist party and a person leading a green movement that there is even further to the left. So it was very, very funny. Or you'd look at politics within the Netherlands, and certainly Geert Wilders and some of these people rising to prominence, the old left sort of losing its coalition partner of center leftists, having to adopt the far left in order to stave off the evil far right. Or you'd look at France, where, who were the people at the end? A far leftist who won, and someone who, well, economically, Le Pen is a leftist, but who's more nationalistic in that sense, more nativistic at least in the French case. Or you'd look at Germany, where there's an upswelling of both the far right and the far left, again so-called in some cases. Denmark. It's happening all over the world. You have parties now in Eastern Africa that exist solely on one platform, and that's kicking out Chinese colonialism. The world is in uproar right now. We are in a period of transformation. Look, the internet fundamentally has expanded human horizons. What happened is we had achieved stability once the whole world's surface had been explored. World War II is sort of the culminating end of the former paradigm as far as travel and communication, starting off the Cold War. Ultimately, though, it was a relatively peaceful time. Yes, there were a bunch of proxy wars, but for most of the world, for most of the Western world especially, no real wars. They're engaged in a long-term hostile struggle where the world could end at any moment, and yet there was between them, at least in the most physical sense, peace. They just picked off at one another's smaller allies and postured and maneuvered and conducted odd diplomacy and spy versus spy shit. That paradigm has ended. The battlefield is now partially in cyberspace, and we have a new frontier. We can't colonize space yet, we're colonizing the internet. We're all vying for control of human communication. It is a globalistic problem. This is why it is so important for us to fight back against all forms of monopolism, censorship, foreign pandering in the internet. As Americans, especially above every other group of people, we have a responsibility to do that. We need to hold our tech firms accountable to that as well. Because otherwise we essentially lose the next World War. World War III is being fought with computers right now, and a lot of people aren't even aware of it. But I'm glad when I look at the Canadian situation there and I see that the old guard, the Liberal Party, having problems. At the very least, even if you say, well, the Greens, I could never support them politically. Yes, but it'll put pressure on the Liberals. Maybe Trudeau, in a moment of clarity, will say, maybe it's me. Maybe my policies are the problem. Maybe I'm pissing people off and I should fucking do something different. That's what smart politicians would do anyway. Say, okay, yeah, I'm going to back off this issue. I've heard you. I happen to believe in X, but I've heard the Canadian people loud and clear. You believe in Y, so I'm not going to push the issue. That's what you should do. We have politicians doing that right now here on the drug war. Some people are like, well, I don't smoke weed, I don't like weed, but the people are for it. I'm just going to back off. It shouldn't be prioritized. Denver, by the way, I think yesterday held a vote on whether they wanted to legalize, well, not legalize, but decriminalize shrooms. I don't know if that passed or not. Somebody tell me in the comments. I'll look it up separately. That's about all. Peace out.